All right, very good. Well, thank you all so much for coming back for the fifth and final episode of the Boardroom series. Our title tonight is Who Are You Looking For? Building Diversity on Library Boards. I'm Bonnie McEwen with the Northwest District Office. I'm joined tonight by Nancy Medema, who is Program Director for the Library Support Network, and Nancy has been with me each and every time, thankfully. And tonight, Jay Peterson, who has also made an appearance nearly every time. Jay is my counterpart, the consultant with the North Central District. And again tonight, catalog registration showed we were at 90 people who had registered. So the numbers have been so strong this fall season. We're just so grateful for that. I think it proves that board education is valued. So we're glad to have you here. This is our like our finale episode. We should have done something like a party or something.
We should have. We should have brought treats for everyone.
Yes, virtual treats. Yes. Well, the books you see here on the screen are two pretty important publications from the State Library. We show them each time because each time in the boardroom we do have some new and different people joining us. So we always want to put in a plug for these publications, both of them up on the State Library's website in their entirety. The address shows on the top of the slide. On the left-hand side is the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook, the current version. Oh, but wait, there's a new version coming. You heard us talk about that last month, actually, if you joined us for the October webinar. And on the right, In Service to Iowa Public Library Standards is the book that outlines all of the standards and a wonderful explanation of what you need to know when you participate in standards. So we hope you'll take a look at those publications and get familiar with those if you're not already. And I said, oh, but wait, look at that snappy new cover. Whether it will in fact be a 2020 edition, we don't know yet. We can't promise now that it's mid-November. We can't promise, but 2021 for sure. We will have ready for you the new version of the Iowa Library Trustees Handbook. Our webinar in the boardroom just last month again was a look at a preview of this of the new edition. So you can circle back to any of these boardroom webinars that we've been doing since July. The recordings are up on our website. So if you missed October and you're really just keen on exploring more about this handbook, at least you can see a preview in the webinar we did last time.
And it's very close. We are getting very, very close.
We are so close. We're done with the writing. We're headed next to the editorial process.
Yes.
Just a quick message here about Big Ideas book discussions. Anyone is welcome to join. The Big Ideas book group that the State Library sponsors, they're always done online and they're typically done quarterly. Trustees for sure are welcome to join, but fair warning, this is daytime programming, unlike the boardroom series. Big Ideas is daytime programming, but we use books well outside of library management, but we take the concepts from books from other occupations, from other topics. We've done books on public speaking and community engagement, workplace relationships, so many different topics we've done over the years. And we apply those concepts to library management. Well, an idea dawned on me this spring that what if we got more mileage out of these book discussions that we've had, and what if we used some of those books and did the same thing really in the boardroom series, apply the concepts to the business of library boards. That really was how we approached the Boardroom 2020 this year. And I think it's been great fun. I'd love to. It's been a fresh approach for us, for Nancy and myself, and we'd love to hear if that's been something you've enjoyed as well. We have really enjoyed approaching it that way. And here you see the books that we have used in the boardroom. We began in July with the book Upstream, one of my favorites in this grouping. And then in August, we used the book The Art of Gathering. In September, Stories That Stick, I mentioned last month. We previewed our own book, the new Trustees Handbook. And then tonight, the book that we will share with you, some of our favorite highlights from the book, The Ones We've Been Waiting For.
And I would have to say, out of this one, my favorite should be the Trustees Handbook because of all of the time and effort put into it.
Well, sure.
But I believe it's the one we're doing tonight. I think this was my favorite out of all of these.
Is it now?
Yeah.
Good save. Good save. The favorite one was the Trustees Handbook.
We'll wait and hear comments on that once we release it. So.
You know, for the people who join us for the Big Ideas book discussions, there is an expectation that those folks are reading these books, but there has not been that same expectation to all of you who are board members or directors who have joined us in the Boardroom series. We were happy to just take some of the concepts and apply them to the business of library boards. We will share enough of the book, we hope, that will get you interested in reading it, and maybe your library has already purchased it. We also think these books would make really good discussions locally as well for your own local book discussion groups. So
yes, definitely.
That's the idea. And tonight, this is the book we want to talk with you about.
And I'm going to put a little disclaimer on this one. If you have read it, you know that it does take somewhat of a political aspect because they are following millennials who stepped up into political office. That's not our intent, especially after this long political season that never seems to end. So we really don't want it to be political, and libraries are not supposed to be political. So hopefully that wasn't a turnoff for you, and that's not our intent for this evening. So just know that.
Yeah, Nancy and I don't read these books ahead of time before these webinars.
Before we announce them.
We read them before the webinar. We don't read them before we announce them. But the reason that this book really caught our attention is certainly the title, but also the review of it. There was one review in particular that made us say, "Oh, we've got to do this one," both for Big Ideas and for the Boardroom. Here's what the review said about The Ones We've Been Waiting For. A new generation is stepping up. There are now 26 millennials in Congress, a 5-time increase gained in the 2018 midterms. They are governing Midwestern cities and college towns. They're running for city councils. They're serving in state legislatures. And they are acting on climate change because they are living it. They care about student debt because they have it. And they are big users of technology because they understand it. So that review really made this book seem really appealing for us. Whoops, sorry. The book is by Charlotte Alter, who, if you're not familiar with her from the book, you may very well be familiar with her work as a journalist. Charlotte Alter is the senior correspondent at Time Magazine, covering politics and social issues. She has covered the presidential campaigns, congressional and presidential campaigns in 2016, 18, and 20. She's covered the Women's March. She's covered the rise in youth activism around gun violence and the rise in youth activism around climate change. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. So she is a very accomplished journalist and author. And I have to say, Nancy, Charlotte Alter is described as a senior correspondent at Time. Let me just roll back and show you her picture. Yeah, so in case that phrase
Relative.
depressed you like it did us, that's a picture of a senior journalist. How great. What does that make us? We don't really want to talk about that.
So I said earlier that this one was a little bit political, the book was. So if you read it, did you find it too political? Did you find it hopeful? Did you find it depressing? I personally found it very hopeful.
I did too.
I enjoyed it a lot. So just you can write in chat. If you want to use your mic, you're more than welcome to. We haven't silenced the mics at all. So I'm curious if anybody did read it. Did you like the stories and stuff they talked about?
I loved it.
Oh, good. Good.
But I am a Democrat. I mean, it does go along with my political leanings. But
well, it had both parties.
Was one very conservative person in there, but maybe it's another book I read. But I thought
no, it had both Democrats and Republicans in it.
Yeah.
Probably more Democrats than Republicans, but they were focusing on millennials who were stepping up. And so she found one, people who were willing to talk to her, and two, you're limited to the ones who are doing it. So that probably had something to do with it.
I so much like history that for me, what I really liked about Charlotte's thesis was about how every generation is shaped by a significant historical event. And so she talks about the greatest generation being shaped by living through the Great Depression, and then that generation volunteering for World War II in just incredible numbers. She talks about then how the boomers, lived through the turbulent 60s, sometimes called the assassination decade, with the murders of JFK and RFK and Dr. King and the protests of the Vietnam War, and in early 70s, how Watergate shaped the boomers in terms of just a losing confidence and respect for government. But then what's really uplifting about the end of the 60s was still, for me, one of the greatest technological accomplishments ever, and that was the moon landing in 1969. And so that gave the boomer generation, I think, such hope. And in the possibilities, right? And then the millennial generation, the author speaks to September 11th, how September 11th has shaped millennials. That was their significant historical event, and also the Pete and repeat shootings, school shootings.
Yeah, and that's what really resonated with me in this book. Is my son was a senior in high school during Columbine, or a junior, I can't remember now. And he was really impacted by that school shooting. One of his teachers wrote a play about what led up to it, the bullying, and that was really the first time that bullying became a big social issue too. And so he was in that play, and I remember they had a meeting for all the parents of everyone who was involved in it to talk about the psychological effect this was having on all of them. And as they would practice for this play, they'd have all these discussions about it and stuff. And so that really, I think, had a huge impact on how my son then viewed things moving forward. And he's turned out to be a leader in his field. So I think, it's just what you do with that passion.
Mm-hmm. And certainly continue to share and chat if you've read the book and your takeaways from it. If you'll indulge me for just a moment, when I hear about generation labels, boomers, millennials, and the rest, my first thought is for the greatest generation. Those born before 1928, again, those people who came of age during the Great Depression, and fought in World War II in remarkable numbers. So when I think of the greatest generation, I think of my dad, who is pictured here. He served for 3.5 years in the South Pacific. So there's a greatest generation for you. And I also needed to be reminded of the years, the span of years that are attached to the generational labels, with the exception of the greatest generation. I know that one, and the boomers. I know that one. I'm forever needing a reminder about the years that other generations span, and more importantly, their ages. So I found this graphic on a site called Luma, which I'd never heard of, but I really liked this visual. And by the way, something went goofy with my slide there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but I'll fix that before I send the slides in to Samantha. And by the way, when we provide the recording for tonight, we'll also provide a PDF copy of our slideshow too. So that should be helpful. But because this book is so much about the millennial generation, we wanted to take another closer look, really, at the characteristics of millennials.
Yeah, so this, from both Charlotte Alter's research and supported by other studies like Pew Internet Research, was really well known. These are general characteristics of the millennial generation. Another point from the book is, while young people are more politically aware, they don't necessarily support other young candidates. There's that Bernie Sanders example. They supported Bernie because what he said resonated with what had happened in their lives and what they were going through at that point in time. They're passionate about things that affect them personally, and that's also why they tend to be in positions of leadership, because of that passion. And think about how that passion could be used in supporting libraries and all these characteristics. Think about how that transfers then to helping you support your library. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Especially the last one, they grew up with technology. They live technology.
Yes.
I know there are certainly times I don't want to learn a new way of doing things. We're going through a whole computer change over here at the State Library right now. That's extremely frustrating.
It's painful.
So
yes.
If we had a lot of millennials, Jay.
For whom it should not be painful, right?
That's okay. He's had the pain too. I know.
I'm Gen X, I think.
Oh, maybe. Maybe.
Fairly certain. Just a little bit older, so on the very end of it.
Because
you are older than my son.
Okay. Well, we do want to apply these characteristics of millennials to our further discussion this evening about how that might play into board members when you have vacancies to be filled on your board. But first, I think we have this slide to share with you. Some reading habits of millennials. I don't know if you've had this misconception or perception about young people that they're just not reading anymore. Maybe that's not your perception, but I've heard so many times in my conversations with board members as they're looking to recruit new trustees when vacancies are to be filled. We want somebody who's a library user and somebody who's a reader. That to me has never been a deal breaker, but you don't have to worry about that with millennials, it turns out, because they are readers and they are also library users. So we wanted to share this slide. These are 4 really good articles about the reading habits of millennials. 2 of them are from Library Journal. And Library Journal conducted a study, a 2-part study that appeared in their magazine. just last year. And Library Journal's survey showed that 69% of millennial readers have library cards. How about that? 69% of millennials have library cards.
That's higher than the general population.
It is. And millennials, another characteristics of millennials is that they are more into renting things than owning things. So that fits right into their use of public libraries. Millennials with children visit the library more often than those without children. This I thought was interesting. 51% of millennials said that they make their decision about a book based on the cover art, and they are very much drawn to book displays.
Well, the cover art is $1 billion with a B industry, so it's a good thing that it does actually have an impact.
That is nuts, yeah. And also surprising to me from this Library Journal study was that 60% of those millennials who were interviewed for this said that they still prefer reading a physical book. And of the physical books, they preferred paperbacks. Only 40% gravitated toward ebooks. So there you go. Maybe this is busting through some perceptions you had about that age group.
I wonder if the paperback is because it's easier to carry around.
Portable and lightweight.
Yeah. So now we're going to show you a short video. We tend to do that during these. This is Simon Sinek, who really has nothing to do with this book, but he talks about millennials and what their traits are and why some of the factors about why they are the way they are. He is the author of Start With Why, which is one of the books we did for the Big Ideas book discussion way back in one of the first years, and why Leaders Eat Last, just to name a couple of the books he's done. You can find him on YouTube. He does a lot of leadership and inspirational type webinars that on YouTube. He does a lot of TED Talks, that kind of thing. So hold on a second and Bonnie will cue up our video. And he actually really gets very truthful about it.
What's the millennial question? Apparently, millennials as a generation, which is a group of people who were born approximately 1984 and after, are tough to manage. And they're accused of being entitled and narcissistic and self-interested, unfocused.
You're hearing, Nancy?
Lazy. But entitled is the big one. And because they confound leadership so much, what's happening is leaders are asking the millennials, what do you want? And millennials are saying, we want to work in a place with purpose, love that. We want to make an impact, whatever that means. We want free food and beanbags. And so somebody articulates some sort of purpose, there's lots of free food and there's beanbags, and yet for some reason, they're still not happy. And that's because they're missing. There's a missing piece. What I've learned is that I can break it down into 4 pieces. Right? There are four things, 4 characteristics. One is parenting. The other one is technology. The third is impatience, and the fourth is environment. The generation that we call the millennials, too many of them grew up subject to, not my words, failed parenting strategies. Where, for example, they were told that they were special all the time. They were told that they could have anything they want in life, just because they want it, right? They were told, some of them got into honors classes, not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some of them got A's, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. Some kids got participation medals. You got a medal for coming in last, right? Which the science we know is pretty clear, which is it devalues the medal and the reward for those who actually work hard, and it actually makes the person who comes in last feel embarrassed because they know they didn't deserve it, so it actually makes them feel worse, right? So you take this group of people, and they graduate school, and they get a job, and they're thrust into the real world, and in an instant, they find out they're not special, their moms can't get them a promotion, that you get nothing for coming in last, and by the way, you can't just have it because you want it, right? And in an instant, their entire self-image is shattered. And so you have an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations. The other problem, to compound it, is we're growing up in a Facebook, Instagram world. In other words, we're good at putting filters on things. We're good at showing people that life is amazing even though I'm depressed, right? And so everybody sounds tough, and everybody sounds like they got it all figured out. And the reality is there's very little toughness, and most people don't have it figured out. And so when the more senior people say, well, what should we do? They sound like, this is what you gotta do. And they have no clue, right? So you have an entire generation growing up with lower self-esteem than previous generations, right? Through no fault of their own. Through no fault of their own, right? They were dealt a bad hand, right? Now let's add in technology. We know that engagement with social media and our cell phones releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good, right? So, we've all had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, hi, 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 because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes. It's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is growing slower, did I do something wrong? Do they not like me anymore, right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, right? Because we know when you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it. It's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive, right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. That's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe, right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle. Social stress, financial stress, career stress, that's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them if something better comes along. Deep, meaningful relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device, they're turning to social media, they're turning to these things which offer temporary relief. We know, the science is clear, we know that people who spend more time on Facebook suffer higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook, right? These things balanced. Alcohol is not bad, too much alcohol is bad. Gambling is fun, too much gambling is dangerous, right? There's nothing wrong with social media and cell phones. It's the imbalance, right? If you're sitting at dinner with your friends and you're texting somebody who's not there, that's a problem. That's an addiction. If you're sitting in a meeting with people you're supposed to be listening to and speaking, and you put your phone on the table, face up or face down, I don't care, that sends a subconscious message to the room that you're just not that important to me right now, right? That's what happens. And the fact that you cannot put it away is because you are addicted. right? If you wake up and you check your phone before you say good morning to your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse, you have an addiction. And like all addiction, in time, it'll destroy relationships, it'll cost time, and it'll cost money, and it'll make your life worse.
So I think we ended it there, Nancy, last time.
I think we did too. This gets to what a lot of us see in working with millennials, and they're being tied to their devices. And that's not, and he goes on to say, I would encourage people to finish watching it. It is 15 minutes long, so we didn't want to do the whole thing, but he does go on to give good parts of millennials too.
Yes.
Not just the bad parts.
Nancy, say a little bit about what Sam Bowers said last week when we showed this very same clip.
Oh, I don't remember. No.
Let me bring back the slides here and get back to where we were, I think. Sam said about the that she thinks that the use of cell phones and social media, cell phones in particular, is not so much a rap on a younger generation. She thinks it's societal. It has become much, much more widespread than just wrapping one generation with that characteristic.
I would agree
that she feels it's just a very generational thing now than it ever had been.
Yes,
that's what
and this is
a fair point.
Yes, and this video is a couple years old, so
yes, it is.
That is a fair thing. So we do have a question for you that we're going to do in a poll. Are there millennials on your library staff and or board? So Bonnie will bring up the poll.
Yep. Are you seeing it? Yep. Are there millennials on your library staff?
And I know Lacey put in the chat that she has 4 trustees who are millennials and 1 who is a Gen X.
Oh my gosh.
Impressed.
That is impressive. That's unusual.
So this looks like maybe it is better than I thought it was, actually. I'm not seeing a whole lot of movement anymore, Bonnie.
Okay. We'll look at the results then. That, what is that, 60?
63, 38. So about,
yeah,
that's good. Kind of 60, 40. Just to average it out. That's better than I actually thought, that there are more millennials or Gen Xers working as trustees or working in libraries.
well,
so that's really good.
Hold on. We're going to ask the same question now of your boards. Let me go find that one. I think this is the question coming at you. What about then that age group on your library board? Are there millennials on your board? Clearly there are some in the conversation tonight where you'll say yes. This might flip the other way, but we were surprised last week when we did the Big Ideas book discussion on this title that it was pretty evenly split actually with library board members.
And that's pretty evenly split this time too, it looks like. That looks pretty stable.
Okay. And there are the results, 55 to 45.
Yeah, pretty good. So a little bit, actually a little bit better. No, not quite as good. So still, that's pretty hopeful that there's that many that are on library boards across Iowa. So other people stepping up into positions of leadership, it's a little bit harder for millennials because many of them work multiple jobs because they can't find good full-time jobs. So
right.
Having that free time to do something volunteer like that is a little bit harder. So part of our question on the slide was, I have to get rid of the poll on mine. I have to do that manual. Is how do you see these characteristics and work habits playing out at your library? And just kind of think about it or put something in chat. I said I supervised a lot of millennials as library shelvers when I worked at the Bettendorf Library before I came to the State Library. And I used to find myself really frustrated with how many of them would be on their phones out in the stacks when they were supposed to be shelving. And, you know, we always had that conversation when I hired them about, because we were located by a high school. And I would always have that conversation that, you know, you cannot talk to your friends after school when they come in to hang out, that you just, that's not an okay thing. And they were really good about that, but then they'd be in the stacks texting all their friends. And to me, it was kind of the same thing. But as Simon Sinek says, they are somewhat addicted to that, or at least back then they would have been. So that to me as a supervisor was a really frustrating aspect. Not that they weren't good workers and not that they weren't being productive. But I just saw that distraction as really hard to deal with. So what characteristics do you see or work habits do you see maybe coming up? Or do they take leadership roles within your library? Are they stepping up and helping you with technology? Are they, you know, are they being really productive parts of your staff, I guess is kind of what I'm getting to. And I see there is some stuff in chat. Dorothy said she wishes she had millennials as employees, but most people want to work full-time. Yep, they want the full-time and the benefits. I get that. And for a lot of our libraries, that's not an option. So she does have 2 on her board, so that's wonderful. Yeah. Pre-2019, Dorothy says, when the entire board resigned with the librarian, oh my goodness, all board members were 60 and up and with a 40-year-old librarian. So I hope that's changed a little bit since you've had to rehire and reappoint people. The staff think their ideas should always be implemented. They're not being leaders. Yeah, they probably think their ideas are really, really good and should automatically be done. And maybe haven't figured out how the workplace actually works yet. That takes time. The older one is a children's librarian and does great. Good. My board member's great with graphs and charts on the computer. Yeah, and sometimes they have a talent that those on staff don't. And so it's nice to be able to call on them to do things for us. So kind of think about that as we kind of go through this.
All right. Well, I've really, I love this quote from Helen Keller. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And I've really come to love the phrase collective impact. It's a phrase that comes from Libraries Transform, among other sources, probably. And while Helen Keller didn't use those exact words, collective impact, I like to think maybe that was her meaning. We can have a greater impact on the outcomes by working together in our efforts. And it certainly also speaks to volunteerism. We have a question, I think it's the next one coming up, asking about your volunteer efforts. What other volunteer activities are you currently doing, or maybe volunteer efforts that you've done in the past? Go ahead and open up your mics. You're welcome to.
You're going to be that way. John Dunstan.
Yes, John.
I don't know if I quite fit that millennial category. I'm more of a boomer, needless to say. But I'm on the board of directors of a local nonprofit. I'm on the board of our Chamber of Commerce. I'm on the board of our economic development for the county. I'm a officer in the local Lions Club, officer in our church, sing in local choir, and my wife says I'm never home.
I can see
Hey,
why.
how do you find time to work?
Well, and that also says I'm library director and I have my own CPA firm that I operate during tax season.
Oh
And the
my
rest of the time.
word. But he is free between midnight and 6. So there you
Most
go.
of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. Oh my gosh, John, that's an impressive resume of volunteer action there.
So we have some in chat. A Girl Scout mom and leader, volunteer with kids in a church group, story walk, grab and go meal fundraisers. That's really important right now. Thank you for doing that. Gardening, on the board of the Villisca Historical Society and a volunteer for the Greater Omaha SCORE chapter. I will say I am on the board of the Friends of the Ankeny Library, in addition to what I do at the State Library. So one of our thoughts about being so involved in volunteering is who you meet in those other volunteer groups that you do certainly would make great potential trustees. So pay attention to who you're interacting with in other volunteer organizations, because part of it is the willingness to volunteer and give your time. I think that's important. The Arts Council board member, volunteer at Chamber of Commerce and Church, County Extension Council. So many opportunities for volunteering out there.
And in library trusteeship absolutely is a volunteer commitment. It's just that part of our method behind the method to our madness behind talking just a bit about volunteer activities that you're involved in and acknowledging that being on the library board is absolutely a volunteer commitment, but it's different for me. It's probably different for all of you based on the other volunteer activities that you're involved in. I think being on a library board is really a more elevated commitment because trusteeship comes with some very important expectations. And that's where we're headed next, is we just want to talk for some time about those expectations of library trustees. Before we can really recruit to fill those vacancies, and before you can really answer the question, who are you looking for? You first need, your entire board collectively needs to think about these 3 processes: responsibilities and expectations, skills and attributes, and then communicating both of those things to prospective trustees. Recruiting really becomes a sales pitch of sorts. And I think of recruitment and orientation as 2 different things. I see them differently because recruitment is really about filling vacancies when those seats need to be filled on your board, but orientation plays out over time. Once vacancies have been filled, then that orientation and learning on the job continues. But recruitment first has to start, I believe, by having a really solid understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the board. And you also want to think about the skill sets, the characteristics you'd like to see in the people you're looking for. I think too that too often the job of library trustee is too often undersold. We give it kind of a soft sell approach, right? So if you recognize yourself in this, I get it, because I was once in the position of needing to fill board vacancies myself when I was a library director and when I was a regional library director and employed by a board. We had turnover on the board. We had to fill those seats. So if you found yourself coaxing people to fill a vacancy by saying, "Oh, there's nothing to it," it's so easy and so fun. Come to a meeting once a month for about an hour, nothing to it. when you're scouting for people, that's a tendency. It is. And I appreciate that, but there's a downside to that. And to me, the downside to a soft soap approach is that then along comes the state library talking about standards for public libraries to be met, standards for library boards to be met, the expectation of ongoing continuing education. Along comes the Iowa Library Association urging trustees to stand up for intellectual freedom and urging library boards to contact your local legislators to lobby for increased funding for libraries at the local and state and national levels. So along comes all of these expectations that weren't part of the sales pitch when those conversations were first starting with prospective trustees. So you do need a sales pitch, but you also need to communicate those expectations fairly and consistently up front. We'll have more to say about that in a minute, but let's first look at those library board member expectations.
Well, and before I go on, I want to remark on Adrian's comment in the chat about if you take volunteers, like I said, from other organizations because they're willing to volunteer, you then have to worry, especially in rural Iowa, which most of Iowa is, you have to work about all those other organizations that they're involved in, and the timing of that becomes harder. Whereas if you take somebody who is from, and I'm not going to read it completely, but from a library user, a library donator, you get that passion. And I talked about that earlier. So very good point to make, Adrian, that you do want that passion for it because you want somebody as a library trustee who is very committed to making the library a success. And that does take that passion, I think. So thank you for making that comment. Okay. So where can we find great expectations for a library trustee? So we actually put them in a lot of different places, or we find them in a lot of different places. And some of these, are some that you'll expect and some maybe that you won't. So your library trustee handbook, obviously we talk about that a lot. I'm going to point out a couple of things for you. The library standards has expectations in it. Your city library ordinance, and if you haven't read it recently, you might want to dig it out. That has expectations of what you're supposed to be doing. Your board bylaws, your evaluations and checklists that will be available. They were in the old edition. We'll have some new ones too in the new edition. The Iowa Code and the gender balance law. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, I think. I know I did in the other one. So, there's lots of expectations out there on where you can find what you should be or what people think you should be doing. So let's touch on a couple of them. Here's, you saw this if you attended last week, a sneak peek at the inside of the new Trustee Handbook. One of our goals, again, with this one is, with this version, is to make it a little bit more concise, order it differently so it makes more sense, and kind of, as you walk through your library, your trustee experience, it kind of follows that. So, we've put some stuff on the website instead of keeping it in the handbook because it isn't something you do all the time, like building a new building. Many trustees can be trustees for years and never build a new building. So we decided that wasn't the place for it. But chapter 1 is a really quick overview of what's important for trustees to know and to understand. And so it's a really nice thing to just be able to print out and give prospective trustees. That kind of gives them a nice idea of what they'll be dealing with, kind of a summary of what the job is. And then chapter 2 is another summary that is a nice printout thing, which kind of talks about the 5 primary responsibilities of a governing library board. And remember that that's the majority of our library boards in the state of Iowa. We only have 2 out of 543 that are advisory. So it's hiring the director, approving and monitoring the budget, developing and adopting policies, planning for the library's future, and evaluating service and advocating for advancements. So those are the 5. while in this chapter it doesn't look like we talk about them very much, they each have their own chapter to follow. So there's a lot more involved. But those are just some of the places that talk about what those expectations are for a library trustee. And again, as you're trying to recruit somebody, those two chapters make really nice recruitment tools.
Very good. And don't forget to share this expectation with potential board members. Don't we all just have our favorite standards, though? We probably all do. Or maybe I'm the only one that does. I don't know. But this one, good old standard number 8, has long been my favorite because this is the one that requires board education at a tier 1 level. And this is the standard that likely explains why you're here tonight and why you've kept coming back since July and why we hope you'll come back in the new year. Library trustees really do, as you know, need to contribute time and talent to helping the library meet standards. And board education is not separate and apart from that. Board education is itself a standard, and it is among those great expectations. So, you know, besides what's not fun about this, you know, we think we might have looked at this photo before as this happy group of good sports who are just thrilled, you can tell, to be playing this dopey game with me, holding up dopey signs. But this, I think, is really because it is an expectation in standards. It really does need to be talked about. And we are going to come to, a little bit later, we're going to come to some of those communication ideas that help you communicate these expectations to people who express interest in serving on the board or people that you think would make good board members. This education standard it's not without its pushback. But I think it's because it's not really very well or frequently communicated in the recruitment phase. So I think that needs to maybe be improved upon in these early conversations we have with people who are expressing interest in a library board. We hope that they are lifelong learners and they not just appreciate the idea of board education, but they're ready to step into it like all of you are who are joining us tonight.
We're preaching to the choir here. We know that.
We know that, yes.
So again, I mentioned earlier, some of the worksheets and assessments that we have built into the Trustee Handbook are going to be included again. We updated them a little bit and made some edits to them. So there are going to be 3 that library boards can use to gauge how their board comes together as a group, and both individually and as a group to work together. So there are 2 assessments that are companion pieces. One is for an individual trustee, so what they bring to the table, that kind of thing. And then there's one for the board as a whole that the purpose is to do them and then discuss them as a group. And then we have one called Toward Tech Savvy Trustees. And this one we actually had to update a bit and make sure it included technology that's in use today. Sorry, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. You know, note that ones as a group, and our goal is that you talk about it as a group because we think that'll have more impact that way. But we have one of them, that one that is as a group reads, the board has a method in place for recruitment and recommendation of trustees for open positions. So again, we see these checklists as recruitment tools, as well as kind of assessments for how your board is working, and then taken together with the library ordinance, with the Trustees Handbook, the summaries you can print out. These become a good trustee job description, and they help give a really good idea to any perspective. That's a hard word to say at night anyway, as to any possible job or trustees before they take on the responsibility. That's kind of our thought process, that these could be used that way. And then another thing that you have to keep in mind when thinking about possible trustees, and other than the situation somebody put in chat earlier where they lost their whole board at once, you usually only lose one, maybe two at a time. And so you have to keep the gender balance law in mind as you're looking at potential new recruits for your board, because this has been in effect. It was passed in 2009 and it took effect January 1st of 2012. So it's been 8 years already that this has been in effect. But it does require, the law does require that any public board or commission is gender balanced, and it has some caveats in there, because I think they even understand that in some communities that's going to be really difficult to do, but you have to do a good faith effort, and that does help keep different viewpoints and stuff on. So just remember that law exists as you are thinking about any openings you have, and who could possibly fill them.
Who are you looking for?
Yeah, who are you looking for
Who are you
at
looking
any
for?
point in time?
Nancy, you may have said that the obligation to gender balance library boards is really the obligation of the city council. So
Yes.
in that regard, you guys are off the hook, but you can do a good favor to your mayor's office and to your town councils if you develop a list of possible people who could fill those board vacancies, and share that list with your mayor's office when the time comes. But this really is a city council obligation.
Thanks, Bonnie, for inserting that. Yes, because it is their responsibility, not the library directors or the existing boards.
Because the mayors and councils are the ones who do the appointment process.
Correct.
All right, let's talk then a bit about skills and attributes. We've looked at all of the various sources, and there are more than you might think, sources where you can find and compile board member responsibilities to share in your sales pitch, right? But in addition to those great expectations of the job, there are also some skill sets and some characteristics that you might be looking for. So as you explore the question, who are you looking for? Who are you looking for in terms of skills and attributes? That's our next question.
So we talked kind of about the great expectations and where we could find them, but what the job entails, in terms of legal authority, the standards to be met, the ongoing trustee training, those requirements that are there. What about attributes? What about characteristics that you can look for, or you can hope to find, or what do you need, as are also good things to be expecting or having as great expectations. So we have another poll for you.
Actually, I don't think we do.
Don't. Oh, okay.
Because
my notes are wrong.
Because I didn't get that far.
Okay. So put in chat.
Just throw open your microphones.
That too.
My headphones are falling off the back of my head. If you throw open your microphones and just come at us that way as well, you can sure talk about this and what you've experienced in your libraries in finding different skill sets and characteristics of trustees.
And it could come down to what your board has had to deal with in the past, such as if you've had any challenges to library materials. You might want somebody with a legal background, or you might want somebody who is just better at speaking up and making themselves heard, or being very diplomatic. If you've ever had a building project, or you're going to have a building project, then you might want somebody on your board who has either some experience in construction, not that they would have to put it to use, but sometimes that knowledge is very helpful in making decisions. So whoever has that going on. The ability, somebody wrote in chat, the ability to express themselves to others is a really good talent, and not everybody has that.
Oh, yeah.
A
And
lawyer somebody said a lawyer is an absolute if you can get one.
Yes, and I've often thought too of a skill set that not everyone is comfortable with, but that's a public speaking skills. I think could be a wonderful characteristic to find in library board members for those occasions when you're making your budget presentations to your city councils and to your county supervisors, or trustees who can step in to do presentations to community groups and organizations. Public speaking isn't everybody's cup of tea. I understand that. But I think that can be a really great characteristic to find.
Definitely. That's a good one. Somebody says good with budgets.
Oh,
that would be helpful.
yes.
So just think about what people do in their other lives, and sometimes you can draw on that. Somebody said a retired librarian, a longstanding teacher, member of the community, that kind of thing are always, they bring talents to that board that helps make a more cohesive board that has a lot of different viewpoints too, which I think, CPA and insurance agent.
Oh, yeah.
Just totally different aspects. Good ideas, you guys. So again, to get to that, who you are looking for, some of the library stakeholders. So let's turn for a minute and look at the people, likely people that you can draw from. Where might those potential trustees come from? Who are your prospects? And depending on the size of your town, you may have some people representing these community groups or organizations. So we have a list here. If your library's been through planning for results, the strategic planning process that we do here, we offer here at the State Library, this list will look pretty familiar to you because it's pretty similar. And planning for results requires that libraries develop a list of stakeholders to involve in community discussions, which are really good for libraries to have. I can't stress that enough. But people that would likely have a vested interest in the library's future and their success. So don't forget, your balance or your gender balance and different ages. You want that, but just some of these would be, I think, kind of helpful. So we've said financial representatives. We talked about that one. We talked about let me think. School groups, librarians.
And look at during this pandemic season we're still in. Look at healthcare providers. I mean, how
helpful would that be?
Incredibly helpful would that be now and going forward? Absolutely.
As to knowing what services you should be providing, when you should be stepping back, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful skill set or that kind of occupational experience.
But some of these others, so cultural groups, I think would be really interesting.
Yes.
Getting somebody from, we talked about other places you volunteer, like Kiwanis and Rotary and that kind of thing. And yes, you do get into the multiple volunteering issue that we talked about, but there might be some other good candidates there. Family services. We talked about legal, somebody in the media. What a way to get the word out about the library. I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah, so that's wonderful.
These are some great places where you can get some potential recruits.
Super.
I think.
Yes. And who are you looking for? We continue to ask the question, and in your continued discussion about that question, maybe you're looking for more tech savviness on your board. Besides the comedy bonus of this of this slide, I always like to include this because I've long been a believer in the notion that the more tech savvy trustees are in their personal lives and actually in our work lives as well, look at how we have moved so much into using web conferencing software platforms like Zoom and other things. We've been pushed into this web conferencing arena during this pandemic year in a way maybe than that none of us really expected to be. But the more tech savvy that trustees are in their personal lives, I believe the better advocates they will be for the library's technology needs. They'll have a familiarity with terminology. They'll be familiar with certain software. They'll be familiar with social media. And as we bring millennials back into the discussion, they'll definitely be very well suited and largely unafraid to help the library do more technology kinds of projects and services. I just think that they'll better appreciate the role that the library has in building up a digitally literate community. Now, tech savviness isn't listed anywhere as an expectation. This is just kind of my thing, but I think that tech savviness does speak to attributes and characteristics. I think they're great skill sets to have in trustees. And, unlike Shakespeare pictured here, none of you are that. All of you are well beyond Shakespeare's competency in using Zoom. What would he think of what we're doing?
I think he'd be lost these days. Lost, very lost. So this pandemic has revealed the need starkly for service creativity and tech savviness, which we're not sure is actually a term, but you know what we mean. So we want a little bit of feedback from you here. How did you use technology at your library to respond to the pandemic? Or how did you personally use it to cope with the pandemic? What are some of the things you've had to take on and do that were a bit different during this time period? We know we certainly had to adapt a lot and quickly.
Yeah. And Zoom is probably uppermost in everybody's minds, but
luckily we had already started using Zoom, so it was a well-known entity for us. There are not many times that the state library is above the curve, but this was one of them. Virtual story times and book discussions. Yep, they had to be flipped quickly because your community expects them from you. And Dorothy says, we're in a technological society and it's a given to keep moving library forward and grow. Yep, it is. That's one of those expectations, isn't it, Dorothy? Zoom, virtual book clubs.
Oh, I love that idea of online book clubs. That's very cool.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of libraries, certainly you are all jumping into the state library Zoom rooms when we do these webinars, but there are a lot of libraries that purchased their own Zoom account.
So that they could do
going
board meetings,
forward, yes.
Or programming. Yep,
yes,
exactly. Read Squared app for summer reading. That was something that I think a lot of libraries panicked about quickly or right away when the pandemic hit, is how they were going to deal with summer reading, which in most libraries is a huge programming part of what they do, especially for 2 months during the summer or sometimes longer. So that got people really worried because it was totally different this year than what they've done in the past, even if they were a pretty technological library and trying to do forward things. So ILS enhancements to improve the patrons experience. Yep, a lot of people have started doing email notices and text notices for when people have books in that they might not have done prior to that.
Right.
Started doing YouTube for providing programming. Sorry, Jay.
Oh, I wanted to say we noticed a lot today from a lot of our informational sessions we had, or that a lot of people have really noticed how much Wi-Fi matters. If you have this many trustees here, it's important to say, understand how good your Wi-Fi is in your library and how many people use that. Be able to talk to people, that Wi-Fi was, vital service you were offering during the pandemic. That there's not a lot of places that have that, and having good Wi-Fi is a great thing to pursue. The better you can do that. We were talking about, and a lot of people were talking about relating to people to children in their community who had no Wi-Fi in their house, and offering hotspots and things like that to do homework. So that's an important role to fill.
Yeah, how important the library became because they offered Wi-Fi. And we do offer a service called Wi-Fi, which counts your Wi-Fi usage. And we've heard from so many libraries who didn't think their Wi-Fi was really being used that much, but they installed the Wi-Fi and found out that it was being used way more than they ever anticipated. And that's because if you make it available in your parking lot, a lot of people just use it there, especially now that libraries aren't open to full capacity. A lot of people are using it in the parking lot because they don't have access elsewhere. It has become a huge need in our communities in the last several months. Curbside, a lot of people went to curbside, which required that they either had email or an online ILS, but where patrons could place holds and be notified when they came in. Text messaging has become really big. Grab and go kits have become
Old
really
360 chat service, put a plug in for that too.
Yep. So there's a lot of ways we've had to really step up and learn new ways of doing things in the last 9 months that probably will many of them will continue because our patrons, I know I as a patron love curbside, love it. And if my library still did it as much, they do it, but not as much. And they're really trying to do it for the people who can't come in the building. But I just thought it was so convenient. And, is there a way that can happen afterwards? I don't know the answer to that. And that will differ by library. So, but there's a lot that I think online programming is going to continue because you're reaching people you never reached before. And that's one of the goals of our library, is to really impact your community positively. So maybe you're reaching people who couldn't come to story times in the building, but they can make or watch it after the fact, the virtual kind. So that's always a good thing too. So if you agree that including people of different age groups or different skill abilities and that kind of thing on your board is important, then you might need to reconsider some of these aspects to be a little bit more inclusive of those different types of potential board members. So your meeting times, if your board meeting times, the library I was at, they were at 4 o'clock. That's really difficult for people who work a full-time job or are lower in the rungs of a full-time job. They're not necessarily management with the freedom to leave to make those board meetings. So you might want to talk about having them at a different time. You might want to meet online, which you're doing now in many cases. That might become a regular thing. I know our commission, we used to meet 4 or 5 times a year from 10 to 3 on a day. And now we are meeting for 2 hours, 5 times a year because it's just a lot easier for everybody. We can get through what we need to do, and we do it a lot quicker, which is nice. And we're not paying mileage, and we're not giving them food. So it's coming out a lot cheaper for us too. But there's something to think about. Post your meeting agendas, your minutes, etc. online. You can put them on your website so that not only can your current board members access them that way, but it also is a really good public announcement for your meeting, and any of your community can see what's on the agenda and be able to feel like they're participating even if they don't physically join your meeting. But it's a nice transparency thing. And then develop an online board application form. This is a really big one, I think, in that if you have an application form on your website or on the city's website, and it should be both places, then anybody who's interested can apply whether you know it or not. And it just makes it a little bit more welcoming and an easier process. So different things to consider for that.
So the last part of who are you looking for as you look to recruit new board members is this communication angle. You need, as we've talked about tonight, that really solid understanding and compilation, really, of the great expectations, the responsibilities of library boards, and then add to that a wish list of skill sets and attributes. And then comes a really fair and consistent way to communicate both of those things, the expectations and the skill sets you hope to find. So communicating fairly and upfront, I think, is really important. What is this new volunteer gig they're taking on? How does being a library trustee differ from other volunteer commitments? It's a heightened level of volunteerism, I believe, to serve on a library board. The next few slides will share a few of our ideas for the process behind this communication, the need for this really good and fair communication. And this is the first tip that I've shared with you before in other gatherings. This is the tip to bring a year at a glance calendar to your board meetings. This is a great visual to help explain this, and in this case, to help explain the recruitment process. I think, in my experience, that board recruitment is too rushed. It's done too hurriedly. And I think it's done too hurriedly because boards typically don't start the conversation early enough in the calendar year. If you would put on your agenda in January or February of the year that you're going to look ahead to June and when board terms are due to expire, you could have this be a more intentional conversation, and the process would be much less rushed if in January or February you looked ahead to those positions that may need to be filled come June, instead of waiting until April, May, or June. That's kind of late in the process. So this is just a good recruitment strategy. This can work for lots of other things that the library board takes up throughout the calendar year. Any of those things that are annual activities that you can sure to be engaged in, probably in October and November of the year is when you're dealing with budget issues. You have to do an annual evaluation of your library director. Pick a month for that. December is a great month for you to review your long-range planning document to see what you accomplished and what you still want to work on in the year ahead. So a year at a glance calendar for your board business is a great idea, and I think can really help with agenda development too, actually. Now, looking ahead to June to see when your board terms are due to expire, that supposes that you have a listing of your current members at the ready. Not that you don't know who your current members are, of course you do, but you might not know when the terms expire. And maybe that sounds surprising to you, but it's not surprising to me, because in the work that I do with Northwest Library Boards, that's a very frequent comment that is made in the board training that I do. People just are kind of at odds not knowing when they were appointed, how long was their term, and when their term is due to expire. So keep that roster current of your current members with the term expiration readily at hand, and then also keep an interest list of prospective trustees. Have that at the ready as well, so that you can add and subtract names when you have these discussions. Now, maybe some of you are already using this technique. I think this is a great practice. This is thanks to the Indianola Public Library, where they have not only listed all of their library board members on their website. You can see here they've also included the board term expiration. So voila. In my experience, that's just a very frequent upstream, downstream problem. So it's a very, very easy fix.
You know, it also, let me interject just one thing. It also, and I just thought of this, it also helps anybody who might be looking to want to do some board become a board member to know when there might be a vacancy coming up too.
Yes.
And so they know when to fill out any application you might have. Just kind of a nice
a good
point there.
So just think about this. In addition to who are you looking for, you also need to ask the question, when are you looking for them? So just keep in mind those term expirations makes that recruitment so much easier. And I think that's a great point, Nancy. It really helps people who are interested to know when their turn might come up or when their name might be submitted to the mayor's office. Maybe some of you are doing this as well. We're a big fan. Nancy mentioned this a little earlier. We're a big fan of developing online board applications. Now remember, millennials, we're coming back to that age group. This technique of finding an online application for people to fill out as they're expressing interest in serving on the board. This has millennials and younger people all over it, because this is going to capture young people's attention because they find everything they're looking for online, right? So in addition to that, you're going to capture the interest of that younger generation. But here's what else an online board application does. It makes the recruitment process so much more transparent, because you're not just asking people in your circle of family and friends. You are extending this opportunity to the community. You're just putting it out there in a much, much broader way. So we would love to see more of these online board applications posted on the library's website, but also these should be linked on the city's website.
And I would say, Krista asked in chat if anybody had one. I would say, depending on the size community you live in, it's very possible your city already does, whether they have it on their website or not. Because if, they're school boards, so there's got to be some sort of a recruitment process for them. If you have a park board, sometimes there's a lot of different boards within your community or your county. So they might already have one. It doesn't hurt to ask.
Yes, and that's a good point you raised, because the slide is showing you the example from the city of Sioux City. The library didn't have to create one of their own. The city of Sioux City's government website has this online application for any city board and commission where the mayor and council's office would appoint people. So if people are interested in serving on the Arts Council board, or on the museum board, or the library board, whatever, there's a board for the airport as well. So, Nancy's exactly right. Whatever other city board or commission might be appointed by your city officials, they likely have already done this. And what you hope is that they've included the library board as an option for people to choose from.
And if they haven't, you sound so smart for suggesting one.
Sound so smart.
There's a benefit to the library.
Just a couple of more communication techniques. This one you've probably seen before. I have shared this about 1,000 times. It comes from a program that I've developed called Creating a Culture of Learning for library boards. And I like this visual because this is a flyer. This is a recruitment flyer that I designed using Canva. There's lots of software that can do something similar for you, but I think this is a really important who are you looking for technique as well, is to have at the ready some kind of a flyer or a handout that you can give to people who express interest. This hits the top 5 board expectations. They're great expectations, but you'll also notice in the very last space, it says commit to continuing education. You're putting that expectation out there as well on a flyer that you would give to people who express interest. And so that last box says ongoing board expectation or ongoing board education is an expectation. Our participation in continuing education is a needed and logical commitment. Are we lifelong learners on this library board? You bet your life. So it's just a way to send that message in many different ways. Here's another way you can send that message. Include that same phrase that I just read to you about the education expectation. You can include that in your board bylaws. Board bylaws are an internal document. Those are easily revised at any time at any board meeting. So why not use that document as a way to communicate this message about board education? It's another great place to put it. It's all about messaging. And the more frequently you can send that message, the better.
Definitely.
I really, really am so happy to share this with you because when I first found this, quite by accident, a few years ago, I found this online and was tickled to find it. This is a welcome message written by the board president from the Forsyth County Library System in North Carolina. And when I first found it, it was a welcome message that was kind of a recruitment tool. She was saying, come join us. This is what we do. Well, in prepping for this webinar tonight, I went looking for this again, hoping I would find it, and I did find it, and it's still up there. But what really tickles me about this is that now the board president's message has changed. And it's not so much now about come join us, this is what we do on the board. Her message changed to highlight all of the ways that the library has responded to the COVID crisis. So I think this is fabulous messaging, and what a great recruitment tool. This is really high on the communication scale, and it's really high on the advocacy scale. Imagine if you yourselves would tout the library like this, putting it out there as an essential city service. At no time has it been more so than during a national pandemic. So check that out on the Forsyth County Library Systems website.
Well, and I really like this because it connects the trustees to the community who you are representing. That's your goal or one of your expectations. And it's just what a great way to be transparent and to be involved in the community or involve yourself in the community. I really liked that. I thought, what a cool thing to do.
All right. Well, we're very nearly out of time.
We are.
This was jam-packed, so I don't know, Nancy, if you want to pose this question or should we just move to the wrap-up?
Well, I'm going to ask it just really quick, and they don't have to necessarily answer now, but it gives them something to think about. So, are there millennials on your city council? When you look around your community, are you seeing them in positions of power? So your city council, your mayor's office, your county supervisor board, your school board, and how does that or how could that affect the library's relationship with your other city services and agencies? So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Think about it a little bit, because I think it could have some positive impacts.
And while we don't have time to do a conversation about this and hear your input, what we hope comes from all of these episodes in the Boardroom series is that you'll take this information and you'll come back to these topics and talk about these in future board meetings. So I think these would be some really great conversations to have going forward in the months ahead as you maybe come back and share with your trustees who couldn't be here what we talked about tonight, the book we talked about in all of these episodes, and then throw in some of these questions that we've put to you.
And John McKean is saying in the chat that there aren't any on the councils or boards in Montgomery County and Villisca. So something to work for.
Yeah.
Start kind of making that message. So, Your recruitment starts by having a solid understanding of what that role and responsibility is of the board, and including the board education. We're going to keep putting that out there. Again, we're preaching to the choir. And then being able to fairly communicate that to your prospective, got to get that word out of there, trustees, and communicate in various ways. So we've touched on some, we've touched on flyers and brochures. We've touched on application forms and your conversations with people you volunteer with or you meet around town. But how will your sales pitch change as a result of what we've talked about tonight? Do you feel your sales pitch or your recruitment conversations need to change? Are you happy with the way things are? Do you think you do need to be a little bit more diverse in your ages or your representation types or whatever? This heightened level of volunteerism and the expectations and responsibilities, different attributes you're looking for, do you think that needs to change, or are you happy to keep going the same way you've been? But think about that as you're thinking about different recruitment things too. And then as we wrap up tonight, how do you see yourself applying the book's generational concepts, or general ones even, in your library? While you're hiring directors because trustees hire the library director, or in your recruiting of other library trustees. So something to think about, maybe take back to your boards and talk about as a group. After, we're done here tonight at your next board meeting, at a board meeting in 6 months, after you've thought about it for a while. We do really want to thank you for your participation in this series of webinars we've done this year. Like Bonnie said earlier, we've certainly had a lot of fun doing them. We've been really lucky in the books we've chosen in that there's always an element that applies to library boards in them, or that we've been able to make apply. Maybe it doesn't readily do it and we forced it, but we hope you found them useful and like the format. Feel free to let us know either tonight or send us an email, and have a wonderful holiday. It's a fun season coming up, so stay healthy.
Thank you all so much for joining us for the Boardroom series. Nancy, of course, my thanks to you, and Jay for stepping in and helping as well. This was fun.
I enjoy them. Thanks, Bonnie, for being the brains behind all of it.